My name is Frankie. My name is Frankie Jackson, and I will be your subject matter expert and facilitator for today. So I'm thrilled to be here and can't wait to get started. We have an exciting panel. We were talking as we were getting ready to start the webinar. These are some of our favorite people. For us today, we have Diane Dorsch. She is the Director of Technology for the Verizon Innovative Learning Schools. We have Amy Sturek. I hope I didn't butcher your name, Amy. She's the Executive Director of Technology and Information Systems for Green Bay Public Schools, and then myself, Frankie Jackson. I've served as a Chief Technology Officer for the last 29 years. I served in Texas for 2 districts, one that is a mid-sized district of about 19,000 students, and then another that was a mega large district, which was about 118,000 students. So all of my tenure of 25 years has been in Texas. And then we also have Shane Smith, who's a director of technical services from Irving Independent School District, and he's also in our great state of Texas. Each of our presenters will go into a little bit more detail about their career path whenever their part of the presentation comes up. So thank you for being here today. We've got this great agenda, and we just can't wait to get started. Diane's going to talk about good processes promote sustainability. I'm going to do a quick overview and introduction about process management. Amy is going to talk about the acquisition of technology and go through some of the processes that they've designed for technology acquisition. And Shane Smith will also follow her and give a different perspective. So we hope that this is going to be an interactive session that's going to give you some golden nuggets of information that you can take back and put into use immediately. We'll also try to keep it somewhat conversational so that you can ask questions and answers. We have Jill Brown, who is going to be serving as the person in the background that's going to help us manage all the details of the chat and Q&A. So feel free to use some of those features. So let's go ahead and get started. I think the first thing that we really need to think about is, before we can really, start talking about, designing an acquisition system process for our districts, we really have to understand that, it really is about the process. Those of us and those of you that have worked in ed tech leadership, that designing processes is so I think laborious. I don't know that it's as complex as it is just so much detail to try and figure out who does what when, if then else. I have a computer information systems background. I'm really a software engineer, and so I think of everything as a if then or else type of pseudocode just when I start thinking about processes. So really, getting our arms around what is actually a process is really one of the first things that we want to talk about to make sure that we're clear about what a process is. And you could just really think of it as a series of steps where one thing that you could think about as an input is turned into something else, which is then an output. It sounds pretty basic, but it's interesting when you start really defining processes, how complex and convoluted that can get. And it's all with the intention of creating value for the customer. So if it's not creating value, then you really have to step back and think, why am I designing this process? Process is all about creating value for the customer. And in our business of education, that's not only our administrative staff, that's students, that's our community. So there's value to be considered. And Diane's going to really go through a great series of conversations about creating this value of investment and really talking about that. A lot of this work related to process management was really initiated by the American Productivity Quality Center, and they came into being probably around in the 80s, maybe even as far back as the 70s. with the Baldrige program and with the National Institute for Standards and Technology. I put the link there if you would like to reference more information about process management. And then, taking it even a step further is that there's a process development strategy that involves a complete cycle of people and technology. And I think that's where it gets very, very detail oriented and complicated, because when you start thinking about a process, you're literally laying out every step, and every step has an assignment, a responsible person. So it involves a larger segment of an organization, of a district, of a school system, to really put all of these processes together. And so every process really, as an education technology leader, needs to be designed with efficiency, with clarity, step by step, who does what, when it occurs, what decisions need to be made, created also with value, but also with trust and innovation. Are we doing things as quickly as we need to, as fast as we need to? Are there better ways to reduce time, to save money? All of those things come into play. And so that's really where our responsibility is. Our responsibility is to straighten out this acquisition process. And sometimes that can be very hard to do because there are so many steps, and there's so many people involved, and so many stakeholders within the district that have so many needs. And now it's IT commercialization, where there's so many things to buy, so many things that run on the network. It's become even more complicated than it ever was. When I started in this business in 1994, it wasn't as complicated as it is now, with the Internet of Things and all of the devices that we are now responsible for managing. Straightening out these processes, making them efficient, and being very clear in how we design those is probably one of our greatest challenges. So the design of an acquisition process is really this cross-functional design. There's a lot of people involved. There's people in departments, and there's multiple teams and individuals that are part of those teams, and many systems. If you were to count up the systems that you're managing in your district, it doesn't even matter how many, if it's large or small. There's a lot of projects, a lot of programs. And so with each one of those, managing processes could be almost a full-time job. So really thinking about stepping back before you get into the phase of designing your acquisition process, you really do need to have a strategy. So what does that strategy look like? It involves a lot of different things, but it involves process management. It involves a way to manage performance, because people are involved, also technology. And then this process improvement phase comes into play, because everything that we do, we look to try and innovate and make things easier and make things more efficient. So if you really look at the whole process all together, we could talk about a lot of different things. We were talking just before we turned on the webinar. We could take each one of these bubbles and make that a complete webinar, maybe even a complete 8-hour course with 7 key steps. So that might be something we do in the future, but for today, we're really only talking about designing key process. And the process that we're talking about for our key process is technology acquisition and designing that process. So that kind of sets the stage, the overview. 3 more slides, and then I'm going to turn over to Diane, because I know we're all looking forward to hearing from her. But if you were to really look at business and industry, you would look at a standard procurement workflow process. This is just an example that I pulled. But our business is a lot more complex. We're dealing with things that are very difficult to measure. We're dealing with students. We're dealing with their future. We're dealing with individuals as teachers and administrators that are that are involved in these processes. And you can, this is just an example of a technology ordering process. It's not my process. It's just a standard process that you probably would recognize even in your own district. This is something that we've been doing for many years, designing processes, but it's now more complex. And it's more complex because we're now needing to be more concerned about trust and building trust into everything that we do, especially with data privacy and security. So if you compare where we were in 1994 to where we are today in 2022, our environment is much different. So when you really think about building trust in this acquisition process, it becomes even more imperative that we really take a good look at how we're purchasing not only systems, which include hardware and software, but all of the processes in that data transfer. And so that's really where this trusted learning environment comes in. So many of you may know about the trusted learning environment. This isn't what this webinar is about, but it does play into the acquisition process because it plays into the business practices and those practices related to vetting online services and data privacy agreements and moving data from within the cloud and how we go about sharing all of those pieces. So keep all that in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation, of the rest of our points that we'll be talking about in our webinar. And again, if you have questions, feel free to ask and interject, and we'll do our best to answer those. So very excited to get started. Diane, I'll turn the slide over to you and I'll give it to you. So welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Frankie, for hosting this. And I am honored to be able to talk about this because it's such a relevant topic that all IT leaders go through. And it's just been great to even compare and contrast different districts as we talk about this. I want to say, as a former Chief Technology and Information Officer, that we as ed tech leaders don't want to be the Department of No. We really do not want to be the Department of No. We truly do want to support innovation that takes place in the classrooms. And so, yeah, any investment in an acquisition would be grounded in verifiable methods. We do that. We use rigorous vetting processes. We work to standardize things. We make sure that there's curricular support for all the things that we're bringing in to a district relative to technology. And Amy and Shane are going to talk about that in a bit. But, in the next slide, we're ultimately looking for sustainability of the thing. And so you can advance, Frankie, to the next thing. And we're trying to get value and the value of investment. We're trying to, when we ask all these questions, because I think we annoy principals or teachers sometimes because we ask a lot of questions, but we want to help identify the value of the investment. How does that impact learning and what value does it bring to our educational organization? So again, we don't do it to be mean. We're not the Department of No, but we really do have to get down to the nuts and bolts of things because our job is to support the learning that takes place in the classroom. So just in case you missed last month's value of investment talk, and I recommend you go back and watch the recording because it was pretty good. I thought it was good because talking about the value of investment and the total cost of ownership is something that we always need to keep at the forefront. I want to share a quick guide with you. And so if you were with us last month, perhaps you saw this, but take a look at this slide. You have to be able to capture that value of investment, and it is a process. So step one is determining the total cost of ownership. And you'll hear, even things like a 3D printer has tentacles. Who's going to buy the filament? Who's going to pay for repairs? Who's going to learn about things? Is there a place for you to plug it in? Where are you going to keep it? All these questions need to be answered. The next thing is calculating any projected return on investment. And again, these soft things, these educational things, there is a return on investment because our students need to experience and be part of the innovation and the engineering process. And so, you know, some of these things where you feel you're stretching to make connections, not really. We're giving our students the experiences they need in order to succeed. Okay, and then also measuring the qualitative benefits. And this, I believe, is where you can be really strong in having the teachers and the students tell the story of why this is a benefit. And you need to record that somewhere because you're going to be going back to those things as to why we need to replace our 3D printer or why we need to make sure that we've got money set aside for repairs for this new thing. And all those other things that have to do with it. So you also want to consider your project risks. What are some things where things can go bad? And I always told my people, I don't like surprises. You need to tell me right away, what are some things that could go bad? So that we know and we're prepared for them. And I always feel if we're prepared for them, they don't happen, right? Maybe you do too. And then the last thing is, you know, value of investment is not always A plus B equals C. Okay. And so again, you need to have a well thought out process and plan for getting this technology. And so that means that we do have to ask a lot of questions. And speaking of that, I want to talk about sustainability, as that has to do with all these things. Okay. One of my favorite quotes, and you heard Frankie talk about, you know, being involved in the Baldrige continuous improvement and NIST standards and those types of things, goes back to sometimes some of this person, W. Edwards Deming. And he always talks about the importance of a good structure. And trying to put people into a bad structure, even good people into a bad structure, doesn't allow for success. You need to build good, consistent structures. And I believe in my leadership that I've seen good structures be put together right in front of my eyes. And that's what Amy's going to tell you about, because she is now heading up Green Bay Area Public Schools, where I was. And we had a problem with ill-gotten goods appearing. You know, teachers, principals saying, hey, I got this 3D printer from Donors Choose, and I need a technician to hook this up. And so we found that happening more often than none. And we felt behind the 8 ball. So we had our project manager work with our department to help build a process. And this process started, gosh, way back in 2013, 2014, and it has evolved through time all the way. And you'll hear Amy talk about how it has evolved and even survived without, you know, an immediate leader right there to carry it out. But it really is something that when you build a good structure, it helps a process be sustained. And that is the best comfort that you can give people as they move in and out of a department. And speaking of sustainability, another way you can build sustainability besides building good processes is good people. And Amy and Shane are both examples of great people, classroom teachers, just like I was, who worked hard and have a great aptitude toward leadership and technology. And they are going to share how they're executing, planning for, and implementing an acquisition process. So you know what? The next generation of IT leaders is in great hands. As I pass the baton off to Amy Sturks over at Green Bay Area Public Schools.
Diane, can I ask you this one question while Amy gets herself ready?
Sure.
Did the process, you know, you mentioned, I think you said 2014. Did you think that the process definition that you did in 2014 laid that groundwork? And it was probably, if I had to estimate, you and I haven't talked about it, is that it was a complex process with all these people and cross-functional teams working together. But once that process was defined, and so this is a great question because we haven't heard from Amy yet. Do you think that it was easier because you did all that upfront work to really pull that process and continue to look at it and improve upon it, innovate it, and work on it? Maybe just kind of talk a minute about, all of those technical people and things that had to go on in that process.
Sure. Well, and again, yeah, it started with our project manager and then bringing, not only our hardware technician, network team, technology integrators, help desk people, leadership, people from curriculum, people from the financial side of things, the need to know people as well, like my supervisor, and all those different people needed to have some piece of that puzzle. And it was messy, just like that graphic you had earlier of that mess everywhere and then that nice straight line at the end. I still feel, through the iterations that I was on duty, Amy was on duty, when, it just got better and better. And I'm sure she's still improving it as the needs of the district are changing, or as we get different people that need to get into that process. So yes, it was a mess, and I just didn't have the brain to make that work. Amy is really good at that. Our project manager was really good at it. And we were able to really, put together something that did work. And it's beautiful. It's still paying its dividends today, as Amy will tell you. So yeah, I'm excited for you to hear about what Green Bay was able to do.
I love your term, paying the dividends, because that really is what it is. And I really hadn't thought about that term, but that's exactly kind of captures that. So Amy, we can't wait to hear from you. So take it away.
Well, hello, everybody. It is great to be here today. And thank you, Diane and Frankie, for setting the stage for Shane and I to share what's taking place in our districts. As Diane had mentioned, our process in Green Bay, so I'm the Executive Director of Technology and Information for the Green Bay School District located in Wisconsin. If you give yourself the hand, we're right here by the Great Lakes. We started this process back in 13-14. And are still going back to documentation from 2014. It feels like a weekly basis that I'm going back and looking at an acquisition from the past. When we started to roll this out, I think two of the biggest questions we ask in our acquisition process is, what does the district need to know now? And Frankie, I appreciate you talking about how this is people and departments outside of technology, right? It is, what does the district need to know now? I'm talking about facilities, finance, curriculum, technology, you name it, the district. And then what are we going to need to know 5 years from now? Possibly when I'm not sitting in this seat, or Diane's not sitting here, whoever is filling out this acquisition, 5 years from now, if they're not here, what will we need to know? So with that, if we go to the next slide, Frankie, our acquisition process, we call it our technology acquisition form. For short, it's referred to as a TAF. And for the first few years, I don't think people knew what the TAF was, but now I'm confident in saying that all of our building principals and administration know what TAF means. And I think it's become a verb of, do I need to TAF that? Or please TAF that, right? It's become a new word for us. But the first section that I think districts should really consider, what information goes into our acquisition process, a form that might be filled out. For us, it's a Google Doc, is just a very general definition of what is the proposed purchase. You're looking for iPads for elementary school. Are you looking for a 3D printer for room 205 at said school? What is just the general purpose? And then define further the guidelines for when you need to use your acquisition form. So for example, Do you need to use your acquisition form when a school district wants to buy mice? Or is it just for larger purchases, like devices beyond what technology is purchasing, donations that might be coming in for 3D printers, esports equipment? When and when not is your technology acquisition form needed? And then possibly provide some guidelines of if this is purchased with title funds, here's maybe an extra step you need to do. If this is purchased with grant funding, here's district policy, extra steps that might need to take place. Continuing on, I think it's important for districts to consider just noting the application date, the budget year, and the funding source. And by funding source, I mean account code, right? I want to know that this was funded through a grant. I want to know it was funded through title. I want to know it was funded through a PTO. I want to know if it was funded through a building-based budget, so that we can plan for replacement and repair of the request. And we actually put directly in our acquisition form, this is a change. When we first started, we said, oh, what is your plan of replacement? And now we say, here is your plan. All replacements and repairs are at the discretion of the original budget holder. So if you get something from PTO, from a building-based fund, you can't come to technology 5-6 years from now for repair replacement funding, but we ask that the original budget holder has that say. So we define all of those things up front in the first section. And I'm going to go back here a little bit. The largest component of that first section is the curricular connection, right? Everything we do has to support the teaching and learning happening in our classrooms. So we don't want to buy things because they're fun and sparkly. We want to buy them because they specifically go back and tie to our curriculum, tie to what our students are supposed to be learning. So we ask for that curricular connection or that justification up in section A. In section B, we go a little bit further into that purchase request. So in section A, we say iPads for, I don't know, 3rd grade, above and beyond what technology purchases. But now we're looking for just a little bit more information. We want to know how many, make and model, the cost associated with the said hardware. And then are there additional costs that come into play? Are you going to need training or accessories? Is there ongoing costs? So Diane had talked about a 3D printer, right? We want to define in this process, a building is going to buy a 3D printer. This same building is going to buy the filament. They are going to possibly pay for the additional training that the site offers, and they are going to fund the ongoing costs of the filament that is needed for this 3D printer. So again, it's just very clear up front what the expectations are for this purchase. We also ask again for that account code to be provided and the original quote, which is very helpful when you can go back and look to see, okay, we paid this for, I don't know, this 3D printer last year. If another school is looking to buy a 3D printer, we can tell them it's going to cost you approximately this dollar amount. One of the things that I think districts should also consider is a standard purchase list. And Frankie, I think I saw this on one of your slides you shared earlier, is what is truly considered, standard for our district. What type of 3D printer do we buy? What type of laptop, if you're going above and beyond technology purchases, is supported, so that you can provide that right up front. Frankie, if you can move on to the next slide for me, we'll go into section C of our form. And that is really where we focus on departments outside of ours. So Diane talked a little bit earlier of maybe you're buying a TV for an office and you want it on wall A. We need to ask, is there a power outlet there? Does it need a network port? What other associated costs outside of technology costs, maybe within facilities, should we consider? And then who is going to be responsible for making those requests to your facilities department? So this way, facilities is aware of a request that might be coming their way. They can provide their approval as well. along with you. So you are a team going forward in this purchase. In section D, we want to know what happens when the item that is being purchased arrives at our building, arrives in our district. Where is it going to be delivered? Who's going to install said items? And then if it's something that's physically going on a wall, like an interactive panel or a display, where again is that going to go? And that gives us kind of a double check on, okay, we said it's going on this wall. Is there power? Is there network? Whatever else might need to be within the facilities aspects. We ask here that we have somebody who is responsible for training of the resource, and not only the initial training, because a lot of time that's a vendor, but who is responsible for the ongoing training. And this is extremely important because a lot of times we will have requests that come to us saying, hey, I don't know, so-and-so purchased this digital sign 5 years ago. The person left that was using it. Now, can you train me on this? And we can go back and we can say, actually, there's a list of 2 or 3 contacts here. Let's get you in connection with these folks who are the experts in this digital sign. We also look to define out storage expectations. If it is something like a laptop that is given to an hourly worker who should not be taking that laptop home, where does it go? Where is it kept secure? Same thing with maybe STEM items or different components that students might be using. How are we going to keep those things secure in a storage? We also look to define expectations throughout our process of who is doing what. And because we're working in a Google Doc, we have the ability to provide those notifications to staff that say, hey, we are expecting that this be delivered here. FYI, put that in a comment on the Google Doc. Or Amy, we are expecting you to install this. Tag Amy in a comment so she knows. Or Amy, we're expecting you to make sure there's a power outlet here. Tag Amy in the comments so that notification and having your acquisition process be a live living document is extremely helpful. Frankie, if we can go on, we'll talk about the last section and further considerations. In the last section of our document, we have an approval space where we literally type out anybody that is needing to give approval of this purchase request. So we have the project facilitator. We want to make sure that they agree to everything that we've outlined in this technology acquisition form. We have this acquisition form. This is new this year for us. It goes through each of our technology teams. So all of our technicians look at this, and if they have any concerns or things that we should be thinking about that maybe we haven't thought about already, it gets noted and we get their approval. This goes through our programmers in case the hardware purchase is tied to a software that might need any support for rostering within our programming team. They get the opportunity to take a look at this document and the requested purchase. It also goes out to any of our installers. Again, just to make sure that we're hitting everybody, anybody that is doing something is aware of what is expected before this item arrives in our buildings. We also send this to our department leads, the budget owner, and then again, it goes through a large review and approval before anything can be purchased. Shane, I see you've unmuted. Do you have a little comment you want to throw in here?
Oh, I'm not rushing you at all. I was just afraid I'd forget.
Okay. I didn't want to pass
But you did have a
opportunity here.
While you gave me the mic, there is a question. It said, Amy, would you be willing to share a copy of your TAF form you're using?
Let me go through and take out all of the things that note our district. And yes, I can work to get that out to Jill, Frankie, and Diane. I can do that. The last thing I want to talk about before handing the mic over to Shane is just other considerations, like above and beyond this one document that you have folks filling out is your record keeping. So as Diane noted, we started this process in Green Bay back in 2014. We have one spreadsheet that has a tab for every single purchase year. This picture on the screen here is a very small image of that spreadsheet. And you can see the naming conventions of our documents are 21.22.017. That means the 21-22 school year, and it's the 17th technology acquisition form. Then you'll see below 21-22-019, again, 21-22 school year with the 19th technology acquisition form. So if I know there was a purchase made in 2015, I'm being asked to replace that. I can go back to the 15.16 tab and look for that purchase. Also, and within your naming conventions, you'll see in column C here, we have the software acquisition form. So not only does Green Bay have a vetting process for hardware-based items, but we have that for software-based items. So something I think Frankie and Diane both kind of alluded to is not only knowing what's coming in before it gets there for hardware, but also software. So you can vet your student data privacy, your rostering, the support of all of those things behind the scenes, again, before they get there. The last thing I want to talk about is the labeling and the inventory. If something is purchased with our technology acquisition form, when it arrives to us, it gets a sticker slapped on it that says this was purchased with TAF 21-22-017. And that sticker tells us and the receiver of these items that this was not funded by the technology department and it will not be replaced by the technology department. Again, going back to the sustainability of that item, that unless it's a district-wide purchase, it needs to be refunded and replaced and repaired by the original budget holder. And that goes right into our asset management system. And the asset is also tagged in the system as being purchased with the noted TAF number 21-22-17. So further considerations outside of the actual one, the form. So with that, Shane, I'll pass off the mic.
Well, thank
Amy,
you
can
so much, Amy.
Amy, I was
Frankie
ju-
has a question.
I
Yeah,
was
go
just
for it,
going to
Frankie.
ask you, Amy, I absolutely love this process and I could just see how this information is so beneficial to any technology department that is purchasing technology. I love this labeling of your inventory. You know, sometimes it's the smallest of things that come back and bite you. Have you ever, are you having any issues with labeling and students pulling off those labels, or, you know, even a nervous staff member, you know, picking at the label? Or because, you know, something small like that, you know, if you lose that label, it is in your inventory. I guess that would be your secondary backup.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So it has the asset tag on it, which ties back to our inventory
Yeah.
system.
Okay.
Our inventory system also has the serial numbers listed.
Yeah. So
So if the asset tag goes, we have that serial number. But this is just, it's such a part of our culture of our district now,
mhm.
because like when Diane was talking about the ill-gotten goods, if we received an ill-gotten good, we would not support it until it went through the TAF process. So don't get us wrong, there was a time frame where the process was, you know, as the district is changing how we would do things, we would have to say, yes, we know you've got this iPad from Donors Choose. We're so happy for you. We need you to fill this process out so that we can best support you now and 5 years from now. And as soon as this is done, we can make sure that we're setting up your iPad correctly with the correct apps you're requesting, whatever it may be. So we haven't really had any issues with those tags coming off because I think know that it's just kind
Yeah,
of.
you got this closed loop process,
Yeah.
which is just so smart. I'm just so impressed. You know, especially you mentioned, I think on your previous slide about the originator of the request owns the replacement and the funding in the future, because that just happens a lot of times. We'll accept technology into the baseline and then it becomes ours forever to have to support, and which, you know, you've got a great process for that. So that's what I call a very, very nice process for acquiring technology. So thank you for sharing. And I know there'll be some other questions, but it's just so impressive. So thank you.
I do.
Shane?
One
Go ahead.
question just popped into the chat about getting a technology sponsor has donated some things. Do you run into this type of situation? And the answer is absolutely yes. Our latest was we had some donation from the Green Bay Packers of Xboxes. That's an absolute yes. And we say thank you so much for this donation. We need to TAF it. And then we go through the process where we can share concerns and work out everything we need to make sure we can support the request or support the purchase. Mhm.
It sounds like this, and you probably said it, but it's just now really becoming part of my mind and thinking about this process, is that this initiates the inventory process. Is that true? Because
Absolutely.
without it, you wouldn't know it was here. You wouldn't have a label.
Yeah.
And then they go through this whole TAF process, and then that becomes part of this acquisition that then kicks off the other process, like we were talking about, through the inventory process.
Yes, and this isn't just, we have our outside folks, like outside of technology funding, they fill out the TAF, but there is a TAF Lite for every single purchase that technology makes as well. So we share in the process of going through documenting what is being purchased, going through the review teams so that everybody is aware. And it's column A is TAF Lite. So there's A, B, and C in that record keeping.
You even have sub acronyms, it sounds like, TAF Lite.
TAF Lite.
All right. Well, thank you, Amy. Oh my goodness, what a great just description of your process. So I can't wait to hear from Shane.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Shane Smith. I'm from Irving ISD. We have about 33,000 students, about 36 campuses. Over 80% of our students are free and reduced lunch. I've spent all 16 of my years in education in Irving. I started out as a middle school math teacher, much like Amy. I was an instructional technologist after that, leader of instructional technologists. And now I run our technical services team, which is all of our end user client devices. And so welcome everybody and good morning once again. Quite honestly, Amy created her slides first, and their process is very, very, very similar to ours. I did not want to repeat what Amy said, so I'm going to take a slightly different approach and get into a little bit deeper lessons learned that I've learned over the last 4 years in this position. Actually, I probably learned a lot in the 7 years before that. So 2014, I did not know until, when Amy mentioned it during this webinar that's when they started their process in 13, 14. That's actually when I started our software design, or I should say led the design, because it involves multiple parties of our software acquisition process. And then a few years ago, kind of tightened up our hardware acquisition process. The only thing I would say that we do slightly differently than what Amy does is, instead of having a form, we do it as part of our technology ticketing system. And we have templates there that folks can fill out. And then to Amy's point, we have records, they're dated, they're timestamped. We have all of our notes. We have what we communicated to you. It's all in one place. We can find it easily. But to Amy makes very valid points. Her process is great. Ours is super similar. So like I said, I just wanted to jump into some maybe details and lessons learned and share those with you all this morning. So starting with a pilot is always a great idea. You get two factors out of that. You get proof of concept as well as buy-in from your stakeholders. And I'm going to share a more specific example of that as we go through this. And then Amy pointed this out about funding source being very specific to the line code. And she also pointed out making sure your asset tags also contain that information. That one, while it seems like a tiny detail, we're both talking about it, y'all. And that was to Frankie's point of do those tags disappear? I'm not as lucky as Amy. Those tags do disappear, but to Amy's point, the serial number ties back. We know what it is. We can print another one. So that one is really helpful. And then a question that when folks come to us, sometimes we start with what's your purpose? Is this just cool and neat and the latest and greatest technology? Or do you have a purpose that you intend to do with this? And I'm going to share a couple of examples. And I'm going to start with 3D printer. And I've seen plenty of both. But I remember how it started in our district. Somebody said, oh, let's buy 6 of these and give them to the people that really want them, the people that'll use technology. They'll do something cool with it. And quite honestly, I saw a lot of the design template that came with the product getting printed over and over and over. And I'm like, what did kids learn from hitting print on the default print thing? Probably not a lot. But then taking that to the other end of the spectrum where we are now, and by the way, we are standardized on a model of 3D printers. We're printing our second, actually we're refining our second prosthetic arm right now. So we did one a couple of years ago for a student that plays violin. And I believe the student this year either plays violin or viola. And this one's a way cooler prosthetic arm than the last one. The weight differential is different than the last one. It's really neat to see these products used purposefully. And back to the ROI equation, could there be some ROI from engagement alone? Yes. But can we maybe do something more purposeful with it? We always ask those academic questions as well. And then I wanted to kind of give an example that I've seen over time of interactive displays. I remember our district buying probably 3 or 4 different versions of interactive displays, won't name any name brands. And I remember that teachers would use them for a little bit, kind of to Amy's point about sustained PD. And then either teacher turnover or user friendliness, something teachers would abandon that product. And so that's why I asked the question of, well, did teachers get appropriate PD? And I want to give a positive example of that. So that's one of the pilots I want to talk about. A couple of years ago, we piloted 18 interactive boards, and we piloted these in our pre-K campuses. And we also put them on height adjustable mobile stands so that they could be lowered to meet the needs of the 3 and 4-year-olds. We started with 18 of those in our pilots with the intent, if successful, to go to 72 the following year for all of our 4-year-old classrooms. In actuality, we expanded to a 3 and 4-year-old program, and we went from 18 to 168. But the 18, y'all, going back to those, we did intentional PD with them. We did the same intentional PD when we rolled out the 168. And also when we were vetting product, we were intentional to get feedback from our stakeholders, our teachers, our kiddos, our instructional technologists to say, hey, is this user friendly to you? Is this something that with, minimal training, but will give you sufficient training, you could actually pick up and use? And so just making those considerations is really important up front. You can go to the next slide, Frankie.
Did you give any do you have any, and this is a kind of a hard one to address, but do you give any consideration to equity when you really start thinking about these?
I'm so glad you asked that, Frankie. And actually, I'm going to quote William Pierce from Jefferson County Schools from last month's webinar. And if I don't get it quite right, I think I can get the gist of it. I believe he said, we're trying to build a school district, not a district of schools. And so we're always thinking about equity, Frankie. For example, when we got our first 5 middle schools, it was only 5 of our 8 middle schools. And we said, well, hey, the other 3 need to look the same. What can we as a district do to make those look the same? And kind of going back to that idea of 3D printers of, well, is it fair or equitable for this middle school to have a 3D printer and these other 7 to not have a 3D printer? That is a huge topic for us, Frankie. I'm so glad you asked because it's something we always consider. And I think it should always be at the forefront of technology leaders. Because I don't think we ever want to have haves and have nots in this industry. We want to give all students and staff an equal opportunity. So I think that's something that we widely consider often.
What comes to mind is thinking about technologies that are donated. And even, from Amy's perspective, in that TAF that's filled out even for donated equipment, that could be a trigger to say, we may have an inequity where you've got a district that lives in an affluent area and they're being given through PTO funds or some other funds, technologies that another school may not be given. And so that could be a great sub-process to say, do we really need to acquire technology to keep things equitable and fair? So another subject, but still important as relates to
it's
acquisition.
huge.
Yeah.
And the other side of it that I think I've also seen, Frankie, as we've gotten the message out there that we do want equity, I don't see as many of these one-off purchases coming to us. If we don't have the people coming and saying, I want this cool 3D printer because they know that we'll provide it across the board if they can just make it a good idea.
Yeah. Great. Wow.
All right, so this one's real specific and granular, y'all. I've learned a lot about AV projects in the last 4 years. And as Amy mentioned, they typically touch walls and ceilings, so you got to involve facilities from the start. We redid our high school auditoriums a few years back, and the screens had to come down. We had to put new screens in, and quite honestly, I didn't write the RFP tight enough to get the hole closed back in around the screen. And so we had to do some negotiating with facilities, and involve facilities from the start is all I can say if it's an AV project, because it's going to touch walls, ceilings, electricity. And Amy talked about those things. I won't go into a ton more detail on that. But I will tell you, pro tip, consider carts, mobile carts. Got a couple pictures of them there for you. Because then the next time you do that project, you don't have to touch the walls and the ceilings. So now that when I do my projector TV refreshes in classrooms, I'm not going to be touching walls and ceilings anymore. I just need a power outlet. And the other huge benefit is you get a flexible classroom design out of it. So going back to our 18 interactive panel pilot, which is actually the picture on the left there, one of the principals of our pre-Ks at the time, she's now our directors of pre-Ks, and we're 3 years later after that pilot. She came to me a couple months ago and she said, I just wanted to tell you were right. And I said, right about what? She said, when you told me we wanted the mobile carts, I didn't believe you. She said, I thought they were going to take up, and she told me that when we rolled them out. She says, no, these are going to take too much space in our room. I don't think my teachers are going to like these. Well, it turns out they love the flexibility of being able to move them around, and they don't take up that much more room. And then back to them being height adjustable for our little kids and also ADA compliant. We have those in our training rooms as well. So just a pro tip I wanted to share of flexible classrooms via mobile displays. And then it's just another thing to think about in your AV projects. You can have, going back to that screen, it can be a heavy, bulky item that has to be removed. So Amy talked a lot about acquisition, but also think about the disposal piece of it too. And that's the other reason we were doing those specific taggings is, hey, is there a special disposal process because of the funds that this came with? And then the other piece, like I said, Navy, is who's going to haul it off? How's it going to get out of there? When's it going to get out of there? And you can see that we got some really positive feedback from our teachers. We're up to about probably 1,900 or so mobile displays now, and they've been highly successful. And Frankie, you can roll into the next slide. Y'all, I'm going to be quick here because you can read a lot of what I wrote. But we've saved a lot of money with RFQs and RFPs. RFQs are a great way to get something quick or a one-time need. Our digital bid system has really helped us cast a wide net the last couple of years since we've acquired a digital bid system. RFP, make sure you give yourself enough points to select the best value option. Don't just use price. I remember an AV project where I was kind of stuck of, well, I can't even do this project because the lowest price vendor is the only one that can win here, and it's not going to be a good outcome. Let's see what else I want to talk to you about on, it makes it easy to purchase parts if you've got an ongoing RFP where you can just, hey, here's my method of compliance. We also issue ours with extension options if that's something your purchasing team will let you do. I just renewed our iPad parts one Monday nights. And then something I've learned very recently in the last couple of years because of COVID is, do you have an escalation clause in your bid? Which means if there's a big industry change in pricing and they can give a memo, they can then adjust their pricing, or at renewal, we say, hey, if you give us 90 days notice in advance that you want to adjust pricing, we can choose to accept it. And then back to software acquisition, we try to do one RFP a year. This came in really handy when we were in COVID 2020, because both Canvas and GoGuardian had already pre-bid in our RFP. It made it really easy to go and acquire them. And go ahead and go on to the next slide, Frankie. And this one, I profess by no means to be an expert. This is something I've learned about in the last year, but I highly wanted to share this with this audience. And if there's anybody that knows more than I do or has other details to share, please chime in. Neil, you're good, Frankie. Go into that last one.
No, I was actually trying to roll up the chat because the minute you said that, we had a chat in here, and I was trying to figure out.
Oh, digital bid system.
Yeah, this digital bid system. Would like to hear more on it. When I saw this, I thought, oh, maybe that's something similar.
So we use IonWave is the name of the platform. Okay. Our purchasing department acquired it. I don't really know what the competing alternatives are, but from me as a user, IonWave works fine. And so that it's basically a way of putting them out bids so that everybody responds in one place. I will say, lay out your pricing very clearly in a digital bid system so that your vendors understand what you're asking. Otherwise, it's hard to compare sometimes, and you end up doing manual work on the back end. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is potentially non-authentic parts, and how could you maybe tell? And so I'll tell the story of why we started even asking this question. We'd purchased a batch of staff laptop batteries that we noticed were lasting only 6 or 7 months when we typically expect them to last 2.5 to 4-ish years. And then we looked on them a little bit more closely and saw some of the English didn't look quite right. And then we started asking some more questions. And so those seem to clearly be counterfeits. Frankie, if you'll go to the next slide, I'll cover the last 2 bullets here. And so you want to ask yourself, does it look right? And does it look right in a few ways? Are the logos right? And I'm going to compare. So both of the top pictures here, y'all, are authentic, known to be authentic from an OEM machine. The bottom 2 are questionably authentic. And I'll just use that word to not say that there's something else. But looking at the photos on the left, if you'll notice that there's a black piece of tape circled on the lower photo, that's just a piece of electrical tape. If you peel it off, it says Dell under it, just like that top photo does. So a thing to look for is there sticky residue on top of the logos? Is there something over that logo? What's under that piece of black tape? And then just as you look more, notice that we're missing a logo on that same left-hand picture, the comparison of the top and the bottom. And then still speaking of logos, looking at the right-hand set of pictures, notice the arrangement in that bottom right-hand rectangle. Notice again that we're missing a logo. We're also missing a serial number on the battery. That's actually on the bottom left picture. And then there's a S where there should be a D. So just saying check grammar, check spellings, check typographical errors, check for logos against a authentic, known, good OEM. And do your due diligence and comparison. And I was kind of thinking as I was driving in this morning, this is kind of like if you have a $40 Gucci bag from 4 blocks away, it looks like a Gucci bag. But if you look, and so these things could pass. If you're not really looking closely, they look similar enough. But if you get up to it when now we're 10 feet away from each other, okay, that's not really a Gucci. You kind of got to do the same thing with your batteries and other parts. We found screens that aren't authentic. And y'all, the battery situation scares me. I don't want to burn somebody's house down. And y'all, I do want to allow a few minutes for questions. And so I'm going to wrap it up right there.
All right. For our presenters, does anyone have any questions or comments about one another's presentations? I think everyone did such a great job, and I know I learned a lot. And for our audience, now would be a great time to come off your mic and ask questions or put any information in the chat or Q&A. We'd love to hear from you.
Shane, thank you so much for bringing up the authentic parts. Last year, I had a few devices that started to smoke. And now I'm wondering if I would have paid a little closer attention if those batteries were maybe not as authentic as we had thought they were. So thank you for bringing that up. That is a fantastic point.
You're very welcome, Amy. I joke with my team all the time now. I'm like, I never thought when I took this job that I was going to be
You would be a fire marshal.
Yeah, like I never thought that counterfeit parts were a thing. That never even was a thought that crossed my mind until it happened to us. And then I had a vendor that was like, well, they're generic. I'm like, no, there's a difference in generic and counterfeit. Generic is made to OEM spec and expected to work the same. These clearly are not the same because they last 20% of the amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Great point.
I guess the only other thing that comes to my mind is the project management part of it. And that is that, you're going through this process of acquiring technology. And with that, if the strategic partner, the vendor isn't going to do the installation, then a lot of times that falls on the technology team. And, we never have enough staff. And so, I don't know how many times I've been faced with this, surprise, we have, 200 devices to install and, I need them by Monday. I was like, really, wasn't in my plan. So I'm wondering, Amy and Shane, you mentioned using your service request management system. And that's a good means because at least that work is captured. There's inventory and then there's scheduling the work to be done. That work is captured in your system. So at least you know that it's coming. How do you handle project management? We probably have enough time to answer that question.
Amy, you want to take it first?
Sure. So here in Green Bay, we start the process with our instructional technology staff members. They are the closest to the schools. they not only understand the technical aspects of a purchase, but they get the curricular components as well. So they lead us through this process. And then specifically with the student data privacy and stuff tied to software acquisitions,
Mhm.
they're good to have in the spot where they can instruct and teach why that is important versus just making it a hoop you have to jump through.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Alright.
so again, very similar. I guess I should have predicted that. So our instructional technologists also lead that project for us, particularly more on the software side. Some of the hardware stuff tends to escalate to my team a little more quickly because we get into the more granular questions that our instructional folks might not be so familiar with, but they help us with the data collection piece, and then we, assign out to appropriate parties to manage from there. And I do want to give one disclaimer to make sure that I wasn't unclear and misled anybody. So Amy, we have had 3 thermal incidents in Chromebooks that had known OEM batteries in them, and about 3 or 4 in iPads as well that had known OEM batteries in them. So you can have lithium ion battery thermal incidents in a good known OEM as well. So I don't want to scare anybody. And the one thing I want to tell you about that too is typically the devices are made out of flame retardant materials. So even if you do have one of those thermal incidents, the device itself isn't the problem, it's the combustibles around it, i.e. the stacks of paper and stuff like that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. It's been a great webinar. I've learned a lot. I hope you have too. So thank you for being here, and we'll see you either at the CoSN 2022 conference or at the next webinar. So thank you. Bye.